Hello, welcome to the Keptn developer meeting. Today is September 22nd. So we have some items in our agenda. Just a second, I will share my screen. So this agenda isn't yet complete. If you have any topics to it, just put them to the bottom. But yeah, we will do a brief discussion of Keptn community, GSOC evaluations, and then go through a bunch of proposals and topics we discussed in the chats in the recent weeks. So Keptn LCS proposal, some changes in the documentation, and Lifecycle Controller, and then we will have regular demos. So that's the agenda. If you're fine, I will just start with the news. So first of all, Keptn Community Day is confirmed. It's happening 25th of October in Detroit. So everyone is welcome to join if you are going to KubeCon. We have a few topics confirmed. There will be some changes later, but yeah, we will have common presentations by all maintainers about the state of the project. Then we will have a workshop for newcomers. And then we will have a few sessions summarizing user experience by Brett, Sergio, Andy, and then we will think about future of Keptn. So we have two topics. One is what's next for Keptn, thinking data operations, and then Thomas was going to present the Keptn Lifecycle Controller. So basically what we are discussing today. And later we will also have something like 90 minutes on conferences and discussions. So any topics you would like to add here, just suggest, and we will be able to adjust taking the audience and the interest. So that's Keptn Community Day. This is a free event. Just make sure to join if you're going to KubeCon. Okay, so what's next? Google Summer of Code. I can show pre-results, so we will have presentations next week. But the summary is that 3 projects are passed. So by Azure name, integration service for Key6, integrations for GitOps with Flux and Argo, and also Rajiv's project for a new documentation site. So these projects are passed. We will have presentations next week, and stay tuned for the announcements. We will also be doing retrospective about the results of this project and how we could do better, because my perception, for example, is that there could be much more engagement with wider community. But basically, we still maintain this split throughout the project. So we have developer meetings, we have community meetings where the rest of the people participate. So maybe we need to rethink our framework going forward, so that we do not longer have 2 separate sets of meetings. Plus, it can reduce the number of meetings, which is also good. Yeah. So another quick topic I wanted to discuss is Keptn LTS. It's basically a call for comments or a question whether we should start voting. So there is enhancement proposal for Keptn LTS. I briefly presented it on the previous community meeting. So I wonder whether you would like to have a quick presentation and overview of what's inside, or whether you would like to just discuss any open questions you may have. Okay. Anyone? Any interest to discuss it at the meeting?
Maybe it's better. Please go ahead.
I think a short presentation would be cool. So just what it's about.
Yeah, so I didn't prepare slides for this specific meeting, but yeah, I'll just show what we have quickly. So as you know, many projects have long-term support versions. So it's from Java to Prometheus, etc. And the idea for them is that to have a stable release line, which is maintained for a long time, let's say 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, with backports and security fixes. So it's quite valuable for users. If they don't need new features, so they can stay on this version and basically update as needed and have confidence about compatibility. So for Keptn, they were breaking changes, I believe, almost every release in the recent year. I mean, every minor release. And we got quite some feedback from users that they would actually like to have something more stable. So Keptn LCS could address it by providing a stable version, which you can just use, which probably doesn't receive new features, but at the same time it's relatively stable, maintained, and they can just use it. So the scope for that, if you take a look at the proposal, isn't just Keptn Core, but basically a number of essential components that users would utilize. So it's, of course, all services like Bridge, it's CLI, it's all installation and help charts are being used. Also, a number of services. They are not generally considered a part of Keptn Core, but from user perspective, they are super important. And there I have a list of a few services. So basically everything we have in Keptn and Keptn. There is a lot of utility services there, like let's say Lighthouse. You cannot really use Keptn without it. But also a number of external services. And for them, so the list I currently propose is Prometheus, Job Executor service, also Dynatrace service. We got information that the team would be interested to keep maintaining it. And I'm currently discussing the same for Datadog. So this is basically a short list of services, at least in initial release. And basically they would have the same release cycle as Keptn Core and components. So we maintain it as a package for some time. And they receive all the necessary updates and security fixes. Regarding the time, which is quite important, so the proposal for this LCS line is to commit to 6 months initially. Why it's just 6 months? Firstly, because it's our first experiment. We need to see whether users would be adopting it at all, whether there is some value for users. And also then we can decide whether we can extend it or not. So it's not mandatory that we stop it at 6 months, but we basically keep it going if we decide to do so, based on demand, based on vendors using Keptn, because we have Keptn in Dynatrace, we have Keptn in Cartel Platform Ops by Kirotech. There are also service teams providing it, so we can collaborate with them and see what would be the timeline. But the proposal is to commit to 6 months initially. And I also propose to actually call it Keptn 1.0. For that, well, it doesn't imply many changes in terms of the release line, etc. It's just a major release. We wanted to do it last year after reaching the incubation stage. So the incubation stage took some time. But now I think it could be a good time to just call the next release, which is 0.20, I guess. Just call it 1.0 and probably proceed with that. So this is what I have in the proposal. There are some other entries like security fixes. So if you deliver a security fix, it would need to be delivered in 2 baselines, etc. But otherwise, it's just a release line which can even stay in the main branch until there is a need to split. So some other changes I proposed is basically, release cadence. So given that many people start working on Lifecycle Controller, etc., we don't commit to monthly releases anymore, neither for LTS nor for most recent branch. So we basically release on demand when there are security fixes, etc. And I guess that's it. There are also some impact on the documentation because we will just use one baseline for the entire LTS going forward. And basically the rest is just a bunch of text. There is a number of open questions for which I have answers, yeah. So my question to the team is whether it looks okay with you, or whether you would like to see something different, or whether it makes sense to start with. Especially maybe Suresh, Azal.
Looks good to me. And just a heads up, for Datadog service, we're already trying to follow the Keptn release process. So we are versioning the Datadog service according to the Keptn version. So if it's 0.19.0 is the latest Keptn version, the latest Datadog service version would also be the same. So my question would be, are we doing something similar in the other services? And do we need to do something similar in those services? I saw Dynatrace. I'm not sure if Prometheus was there. Do we need to change that?
No string need. So the proposal doesn't set specific versioning schema for services. It's rather the update policy. So let's say we have LTS with recommended versions for all services. We update it in the documentation, in Helm charts, etc. And then if there is a need to update a service, basically the same policy would apply. So if you have major features, etc., probably it's not for LTS, but we can have another release with backports and then integrate it with LTS just for stability purposes. So basically, for services, it would be the same approach. We try to keep this package as stable as possible.
Oh, and we are going to match the LTS, essentially. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And my next question was, when do you plan to release 0.20? That is the 1.0 version.
That's a tough call. We first need to make sure that the code base is clean enough, and as soon as we are ready, we will do this release. So I cannot give you a timeline details, but you can follow. As soon as all the bugs have been fixed, then we can go ahead.
I see. The reason I was asking, because I think we might need to do some work around the docs engine and make it, make it good enough that we can also use it for 1.0 release.
So for 1.0, I'm not sure we should use the new docs engine. Why? Because we basically follow the same format as before. And the documentation will be also more frozen in time for the LTS. So there could be some updates, some fixes, clarifications, but there wouldn't be major updates. And it would be relaxed. We definitely need a new docs engine for the new documentation we create. Let's say developer guide, as we wanted new components we create, like Lifecycle Controller. Then there are some discussions about Lighthouse controller being separated, etc. So there, having new documentation engine is essential. But for Keptn LCS, if we can deliver it on time, then I think we can just stick with Hugo.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That is one of my primary concerns, because since we are calling this 1.0 LTS release, and if you're also going to use the new docs engine, because this would be the first time we are going to actually use a docs engine in production. So I had my concerns. So if you're not using it, I think that makes sense. We can use it for the next LTS release, or start using it in general, except for the LTS release.
Yeah, not using it for Keptn 1 definitely saves some time. It actually opens many questions open, like support for search, etc. But yeah, this is something we can figure out later. But at least we won't be blocked with moving over too much content for the LTS. And for the next releases, we will be able to basically be even more radical with reworking the documentation.
So after V1 is released, we have the notion of upgrades, but I haven't seen anything about patches. But I assume when we're reissuing every month, most people didn't bother to patch an old one, although unless we went like I think we have 18.2 or something like that. Do patches work? Is that if we have or if we uncover a really bad functional bug or something that we have to patch,
Yeah.
will we go to like 1.1? Will it be that, or will we be issuing patches?
Yes, we will be issuing patches, and actually we have history of that. So if you take a look at my screen, we recently released patches for 16.2, 17.1, etc. So there were a number of backports. To some extent, we could already call it an LTS. It's just no policy, no commitment, etc. So right now, as a user, I cannot expect that for version 0.16 there would be .3 release with additional patches if something is needed. So basically, LTS just codifies that and sets expectation that if you're on this branch, then you would get some fixes and updates for the declared amount of time.
But I would install that patch as if it was an upgrade, right?
Yep.
Because all we documented how you upgrade, we don't have a document how do you patch. But perhaps there's no difference.
Yeah, there is no difference. There should be no specific upgrade guidelines. I mean, there might be a security issue that might require incompatible changes. So, for example, like we had to do a few times in Jenkins, but it's rather an exceptional state. So the whole point of
just the above that, just a simple process that I think is basically you download your customized Helm chart, you take the Helm chart for the new release, you merge them. I'm talking about just the process, not even the not assuming that we don't have anything they have to actually know as a user that they have to change anything. But so it'll just be another upgrade per se. Yeah. Exactly. Thank you, Mo. I'm so glad you have your camera on so I can see you shaking your head and nodding your head.
Okay.
Yeah, the whole upgrade process is going to be exactly the same.
Okay.
Regardless of what kind of patch we're doing, basically.
Right. Customer, we've concentrated on anything new you need to do and change, and we have customers. It's like, but how do I do the upgrade itself? So in most cases, I don't need to do this fancy stuff, but what do I do? So, okay, so that'll be good. Good.
So yeah, basically that's the plan, and yeah, the question is whether we tie it with 0.20. I'm tempted to say yes to reduce the number of workload. There can be some not technical reasons to release earlier, for example, announcing it at KubeCon or something like that. But yeah, I'm not too committed to release just for non-marketing reasons. So at KubeCon we can say it's coming, and that's it. So for me, yeah, basically, if 0.20 is the version we target, we have, let's say, about 1 month and a half until it's done, and basically we can just call it 1.0. We can agree on that, start preparing documentation right for that, so that there won't be there won't be any additional overhead when we release.
I'm in favor of calling the 0.20 1.0.
Okay. And right now we don't have any breaking changes there, right?
No, only stabilizing the code base.
Okay, so then I think we have a draft plan. I will take it to the chat to get more feedback. But if everyone is on board, I will make plan it accordingly and put on the roadmap, etc., etc. Okay, then. Thank you. Okay, And yeah, basically the next topic we have on the list is Keptn Lifecycle Controller. So I'm not sure, would it be you, Thomas, presenting, or Giovanni, or somebody else?
I asked Thomas, since he's the main technical driver for this topic, to give us an overview about the architecture, how it works, and the general purposes of this new project that we started.
Okay, then I will start. So as some of you might have noticed, we opened up two new things in Keptn. The first thing was we have a new working group, which is the application lifecycle working group. I'll share my screen shortly. Hopefully, entire screen. Share. Okay, so we have a new repository for the app lifecycle, and what we want to achieve in Keptn in the future is that we get more into the real deployment lifecycle of an application. So, for instance, to have our components on the Kubernetes cluster and to deal with resources directly. This working group also works on event specification and on collaboration with related projects. And one of the parts of this working group is the Keptn Lifecycle Controller. The Lifecycle Controller by itself is a completely new and more or less independent component of Keptn, and at the moment in a prototyping or playground phase. And one of the goals of this lifecycle controller is to be at first more GitOps aware than Keptn is at the moment. So you must be able to deploy whatever you want, so such as deployments, stateful sets, daemon sets, and so on. And Keptn hooks inside into all of this and tries to and runs pre and post deployment checks. Keeps track about the application state, and also does some post-deployment checks after everything is finished. To get a bit more into detail, this is the architecture diagram of this, so you don't have to know anything about it. But what's very, very important about this is at the moment, at the beginning, everything starts with a Kubernetes manifest. This will hit the Kubernetes API, and there we are intercepting the requests with our mutating webhook, and try to find out if the object has some annotations which Keptn can deal with. So, for instance, you have to tell that we have to tell Keptn, the Keptn Lifecycle Controller, at some point, to which workload it belongs, to which application it will belong, and which checks it should run. Therefore, and if some of these annotations exist, in especially the workload annotation, then our mutating webhook will add our custom scheduler for this, or our scheduler extension. I will tell you later what this means. And it will create workload objects, but also application objects if they are not annotated. Our scheduler is there to intercept the pod scheduling in a way that we are able to run pre-deployment checks before the pod is scheduled. So, for instance, you can check, you will be able to check if there are open problems in your observability solution before you are scheduling the pod. This could also be dependency checks in the future. This could be scheduled deployment, and so on. So this enables us a lot of possibilities. In the meanwhile, everything will be checked. After everything is okay, then the pods will get scheduled, and after we find out that the workload is successfully deployed, so for instance, all of the pods of our deployment are ready, then we can start doing post-deployment checks, and this behaves almost the same as pre-deployment checks. So we can also always define some actions, and afterwards say everything is okay or something is not okay. What the Keptn Lifecycle Controller will not do is it won't take actions on its own. So for instance, if a pre-deployment check will fail, it will send an event, but it will not try to reconcile this without an action of the user. And this has a good reason, because with the Keptn Lifecycle Controller, we will be GitOps compatible in any way. So we won't do anything which interferes with GitOps principles. For instance, if we would try to roll back if a deployment would fail directly on the cluster, the GitOps controller would always try to get to its desired state, and therefore the things which Keptn does would interfere with the things which a GitOps controller does. So yes, it will be able to create actions which manipulate the Git repository. You can also create actions which do something on your cluster, but Keptn by itself, so the Keptn Lifecycle Controller, won't do this. So at the moment, we are also trying to find out how to hook in with some tooling for pre and post deployment checks. At the moment, there are two approaches. The first one will be that you will be enabled to write TypeScript functions which you can hook in, and the second one will be that you can add containers such as a kubectl container or whatever to execute your tasks. To the current state of the project, at the moment, as I told you before, we are in a playground self-finding phase where we want to try out how this could feel like, how this would behave, and how the community likes this approach. Therefore, what you see in this repository at the moment is a prototype, and we plan to be able to present everything at least until KubeCon. And yes, we are always open for your input, and if you have some ideas or if you want to participate in all of the discussions, there is a Slack channel for the App Lifecycle Working Group. Just join it, and yes, I hope this will get you all further. With this, I think I give back to Giovanni.
Yeah, I want only to add a few words on that. You might have seen in the architecture diagram that Thomas showed that there is open telemetry here and there. One cool thing of this prototype is also will allow you to have a full observability of your deployment cycle. And also the DORA metrics out of the box in this way. Answering the question from Suraj, is this going to be a replacement for the current Keptn or more like an extension? It's more like an extension, because with these pre and post checks, we can then invoke the existing Keptn installation to perform some quality gates. And what is the significance of the CRDs mentioned in the architecture diagram? I think I don't really get your question. Could you please elaborate a bit more?
I'm just trying to understand what the CRDs mean. So the point I'm confused about is you said it's an extension, right, of the Keptn installation. I'm still trying to figure out how the lifecycle controller fits into the Keptn ecosystem. And an extension of that question is, how does the CRDs, the custom resources that we see in architecture diagram, how those relate to the existing Keptn ecosystem or the Keptn installation?
So should I take this over?
Please, yeah.
So at the moment, the lifecycle controller, as I said in the beginning, is a completely separated project. So There is no real relationship between what we know from the Keptn control plane at the moment and the lifecycle controller. And also, you might have seen in the diagram that there are no entities which are currently available in Keptn v1. For instance, in the Keptn lifecycle controller, there is no concept of a project. The services which we have in Keptn v1 at the moment are more or less called workloads in the lifecycle controller. But the lifecycle controller has such a concept as applications, for instance. So what the lifecycle controller will also enable is to let you run pre and post deployment checks based on applications and not on certain workloads. At the moment, you can think about the Keptn lifecycle controller and Keptn as two totally separated projects. And the Keptn lifecycle controller with the correct function or with a certain task will be might be able to run evaluations in Keptn v1. So you can link them at some point in time, but the lifecycle controller does not is not integrating in Keptn v1 at the moment.
Yeah, to speak about integrations, etc. Yeah, you remember we had a lot of discussions about generalizing Keptn events to the CD events standard. There were also discussions about having unified deployment statuses, which could be both cloud events or CRDs, depending on the architecture chosen. I think basically lifecycle controller could be one of reference implementations for all of that, but the standards themselves could be shared between Keptn services and integrations based on adoption. So it's still a big question of when and how it happens, because standards like CD events definitely desperately need some adoption to become relevant on the market. But yeah, I think that this research and fully event-based system could be actually a good source of feedback for other projects we're working on in Keptn.
So Raj, did this answer your question?
I think it gave me more clarity. I still have some confusion, to be honest. But what I'll do is I'll go over the repo once again, and then maybe we can talk in the Slack channel. And I can come with a couple of questions. One last question I had for Giovanni is, Giovanni, when the answer to my question, what does the manifest include? You said the manifest will include the deployment of your application. So by this, I'm understanding you mean the application that we want to deploy
Exactly.
using Keptn, the customer workload essentially.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
You're welcome.
One thing I also forgot during my presentation is using the lifecycle controller. We in the easiest way we won't need we won't introduce new workload custom resources. So we will use what's there in Kubernetes, such as deployment stateful sets and so on. And only for more sophisticated use cases, you will need the custom resource definitions we have in Keptn. The rest, so the custom resource definitions Keptn uses internally, such as the workload itself, are also generated by our controllers. So there is nothing new for the users. Yes, there will be the resources on the cluster, obviously, but we try to keep this as easy for the end user and as transparent as possible to the end users.
Is there any further questions?
Do we have any talk around the? I know we have the lifecycle working group. Do we have any other extra documentation that we can go over to understand?
On the Lifecycle Controller repository in the Sandbox organization, you can see in the main README a bit of documentation. We are working towards improving that to make it more explicit, all the details about what we are about to implement.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. There is if you scroll down, yes. After the architecture, there is the general purpose of it, and then how it works, where we explain each individual part of the Lifecycle Controller. And then, of course, code is the best documentation you can have. So also, if you have time, please go over it. And if the documentation is not yet done. You're muted, Oleg. You're still muted, Oleg.
Sorry. Yeah, so what I said that, yeah, for us, this documentation could be also a source for the new documentation engine. So I guess taking this project and other set repositories like Keptn events, spec, etc. Yeah, this is what we can use for experiments. And yeah, I think that the documentation can be improved over time right inside the repository. So I wouldn't expect creation of a new documentation site, of a new documentation repository, of a separate spec repository, at least for now. But yeah, right now it just starts, in my opinion.
We have a new question in the chat. What's the difference between the Keptn GitOps operator and the Lifecycle Controller? The Keptn GitOps operator was to configure Keptn via a GitOps operator. Lifecycle Controller instead wants to build on an existing GitOps operator that you already have installed, because you're already deploying your application via, for instance, Argo CD or Flux, and the Lifecycle Controller lives next to it and try to interact with the current operator to do something before and after the operator takes place and deploy your application. The previous Keptn GitOps instead was mainly to deploy Keptn as via an operator, Keptn v1, long-time support version of Keptn. If this answered your question, Hafzal?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, it gives me a clear answer of that.
You're welcome. Okay, then since we have only 20 minutes left, I will go on with the agenda. I suggest this. And if you have any further question, please reach out to us over the public Slack or in the next community meetings. Okay, so Andre, you have something on the agenda.
Yes, thank you. I'll quickly share my screen. Yeah, hopefully you are receiving it. Good. Yeah, so other than working on the Keptn Lifecycle Controller, I managed to work on a few things. The first one is regarding the resource service, where we have a small, I wouldn't say a bug, but I would say it was a missing feature. The thing was when the user was creating a new project with an uninitialized Git repository, it automatically determined the default branch, which will be which previously was the master. So basically, we add a feature that this name of the main branch will be configurable via Helm values. So currently, if the user wants to create a new project with an uninitialized Git repository and wants to have a different main branch name as master, he just sets the Helm value during the resource service installation to defaultly set to master to whatever he wants, for example, main. And afterwards, the resource service will use this name as the name of the main branch for the project and for all other projects which will have uninitialized repositories. If the repository is initialized, the name of the main branch is already basically given. So in this case, the Helm value is ignored. Another issue was a performance improvement, also regarding resource service. Previously, when accessing Git, the authentication method was computed for basically every Git action. So Git fetch, Git clone, Git push, Git pull. And in most of the cases, we have multiple Git actions for one Keptn API request. So we actually moved this computation of the authentication methods more to the manager, where it's computed only once per API request, which kind of improves the performance as the logic does not need to be executed multiple times. So for each Git action once, but only for one API request, it's stored in a context and used from the context whenever it's needed. And the last thing was basically missing functionality in the CLI, where we didn't support adding stage, service, or project resources, but just the service resources. Therefore, we added the functionality which is the same as when using the API, to be able to add one or multiple project resources, one or multiple service resources, and one or multiple stage resources. So this logic is basically here. The CLI docs are updated, so a nice example can be found in the code with typing CLI add resource help. For example, here, when adding the resources to the stage, adding resources to a single stage, and so on and so on. Just go through it if you want to use it. Any questions to this? Silence means no, so I will hand over to Philip.
Philip, we cannot hear you.
Okay, so I just refresh everything. Yes, we do.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Can you see my screen as well?
Yes.
I think so. Thank you. Okay. Sorry for that. This time I've worked on 2 tickets. The first one is to reuse some workflow steps in our pipelines. Namely, we had duplicated code within 3 pipelines: the CI pipeline, the pre-release pipeline, and the release pipeline. What I've done here is I extracted the unit testing stage as well as the Docker build and push stage from the CI pipeline and the other 2, and extracted it into a reusable separate workflow. So within those pipelines, now we can reuse this new workflow and just pass the required arguments into the new workflow here. That's about it for this ticket. Goal of it was basically to reduce the duplicated code. And the next one was an improvement for the Helm charts. So the Helm charts now also support affinity options as well as tolerations. This was inspired by the Bitnami Helm charts. So we now have the option to set different presets for services. For instance, we have path affinity presets and anti-affinity presets, which can have a value of soft and hard. Those values can be overwritten by default values down there in the values YAML in the common section. So every setting that's been set here is a default behavior for all those services. And if a specific preset is set for a single service, for instance, this will override the default behavior for this service at this point. So we have presets for pod affinity and anti-affinity. For instance, if you define a default behavior for, let's say, pod anti-affinity, if the service, the specific service here would define a preset for the pod affinity, the default setting will be ignored at this point. Same goes for node affinity setting here, and tolerations. But if a user, for instance, wants to have a more specific setting, there's also a affinity option for the default behavior as well for the specific services. So the affinity option will, if the affinity option is set, it will ignore all those settings from above regarding the pod affinities or node affinities. And as well as from the settings before. This here is, for instance, the default setting in the common section. If there is a option set, affinity option set in a specific service, this will also ignore the default settings. And there's also another option for tolerations for future Helm charts as well. Yeah, that's also about it. Are there any questions regarding that? If not, then I will hand over to Bernd.
Thank you. So, since we are already quite far with respect to time, I will make it quick and just discuss 3 issues I was working on in last week. The first one is also has to do with the resource service. Return specific error when creating a project with an initialized repository. As you maybe know, to create a project, a Git repository, the upstream repository needs to be completely uninitialized, meaning that it's not allowed to have any content or commit there. The problem previously was when you're using the CLI, for example, you're getting, in this case, such a response, starting to create project, error, create project was unsuccessful, project already exists. Yeah, that's kind of true, but the error message didn't tell you that the real cause for this is just that the upstream repository is basically already initialized, and that's the reason why it fails. And with this pull request here, I just made a couple of changes here and there in the resource service, that the resource service itself already gives you back an error that contains the message about what's what went wrong in this case. It will print out something similar like this. Error create project was unsuccessful, provided Git upstream repository needs to be empty so that the user gets at least a hint what he or she could do about the situation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that came up, I think, in one of the last community meetings, and users are regularly confused about this. Now it should be a little bit easier with the current version of Keptn
Yes.
v1. Okay, next thing, also CLI. This was basically a feature request by Adam. He noticed that when he was using the Keptn trigger sequence command, it was basically not able to provide the payload, the event payload, with custom data for his use case. And yeah, I just extended that command trigger sequence with a -- data option, where can use the following format to set custom, so for the user, custom data into the events emitted by the CLI. For example, here we want to trigger my sequence in this and that project, stage, service, blah, blah, blah. Now I can set -- data, and then you have a kind of dot separated format where you can say, okay, test dot strategy. So the key, so to say, equals the value direct. And the next thing you want to say set is evaluation dot time frame equals another value, and this will result in the following event payload. You have the regular Keptn event structure here, but also in the data section of this event, you would have exactly what you put there. For example, evaluation time frame here, data evaluation time frame, and then your value. And the same for the other thing. So basically, you can provide a comma separated list of custom that will be merged, so to say, into the outgoing Keptn event data section. And the last thing, so just interrupt when you have questions, I will just go on, is about Go utils, the Go SDK. This is also kind of a feature request when you're developing your Keptn integration. It's often the case that you need to download the SLI files from the system, and this is a little bit cumbersome to re-implement in each and every integration. So the request here was that this should be kind of provided by the Go SDK. If you're using the Go SDK to develop your integration, then you can just use it. By the way, you can also use it if you're not using the Go SDK, it's just living in Go utils. But here, in that case, if you are implementing a service that needs to download the SLI resources, what you do typically in your event handling function execute, you just need to grab the relevant API. Of course, it's the resources API, inject it into a resource helper. That's just a kind of abstraction above this resources API to make it more nicely to use for the user, and basically inject the resource helper into this SLI helper. So at that point, you have a SLI helper instance where you can just say, okay, please, I want to have the SLI for this project, that stage, and that service, and it lives under this subdirectory, for example, Prometheus SLI.yaml. And then you get back the usual, I think it's a map from string to interface or something like that, where you can then read your SLIs from. So very easy to use and reuse for upcoming integrations. And that's already it from my side. If there are no questions, we'll stop sharing. Thanks.
Okay, I think there is no more items on the agenda, and we're also running out of the scheduled hour. So any last word from you, Oleg?
Not from me. So thanks everyone for your time today. So what is our plan next week? We have community meetings, common time, and there will be 2 or 3 presentations for Google Summer of Code projects. So just stay tuned for the announcements. And for Lifecycle Controller, as I mentioned, if you're going to KubeCon, it's a good opportunity to discuss things. But since almost nobody from this call is going to KubeCon, I guess it's just Thomas. Yeah, actually, my proposal was to actually do online workshop shortly after KubeCon, more focus on developer, etc., and to have all people actually working and interested in this topic, and to have a kind of practical discussion online. So, what do you think about it?
Yes, I think as soon as we have the first prototype, we can do a community session here and show what we are thinking about and show and hope you have fun with this.
Yeah, let's see. But yeah, I think that we have a plan. Okay. Yeah, so KubeCon for those who can go in person, mostly for users who go there, and technical discussion sometime after the KubeCon. Okay, I will get it organized and I will send out Doodle, but yeah, most likely it will be the week after. So, okay, then thanks everyone, and yeah, have a nice day, and see you at the next community meeting.
Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye.
See ya, bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thanks, bye.